Hello, my name is Victoria LeBreton, and I'm part of the presentation for Chapter 10, Partner Violence. And this includes Corey Middleton, Brittany Campos, Sasha Sharp, and myself. All right. So here are some statistics about the incident of intimate partner violence throughout the United States. I'm going to let y'all go ahead and look over them for yourselves, since I'm pretty sure that me reciting all of the statistics on the screen probably wouldn't be that entertaining for everybody. Um, but basically, what you can get from a lot of this is the fact that domestic violence is extremely prevalent throughout the world as well, regardless of your background or your lifestyle. It definitely goes through every single lifestyle out there. Um, Also, culture usually determines if domestic violence is recognized and what types are prosecuted, if any are prosecuted at all. Okay, so now I'm going to go over some operational definitions, basically about the terminology throughout this presentation. Intimate partner violence is used interchangeably with battering, abuse, and assault. Battering is any form of physical violence. Abuse is an unequal power relationship where assault occurs and a presumption of trust has been violated. Assaultive behavior is defined as harmful acts against a person, as well as verbal and behavioral threats to significant others, pets, or property. And domestic violence has been defined as any assault by a social partner or relative, regardless of marital status. So now we're going to go back to the historical context of intimate partner violence in the United States. Now, the United States has been depicted as a patriarchal society, especially throughout history. Um, Whereas I thought this quote kind of encapsulated past views, especially. It says, assault or rape on another man's wife usually inquires moral outrage, severe legal punishment, and is immediate. Assault or rape by a man to his own wife has been subjective. In 1824, Bradley versus the state of Mississippi was passed, where a man can legally chastise his wife for misbehavior. And in 1874, the U.S. court ruled that if there were no permanent injuries, then the public could turn a blind eye to domestic violence. And they encouraged the public to draw their curtains and for the parties involved to forgive and forget. And this was in the state of North Carolina versus Oliver. Consequently, and thankfully, the Violence Against Women Act was passed in 1994 to improve community support, public safety, and services provided to victims of domestic violence. The funding for the Violence Against Women Act was also increased from its start of $1.2 billion in 1994 to an increase of $3.3 billion in 2000. And then since 2005, the Act has received continuous funding. Battered wife syndrome is still a legal defense in the United States, and this is especially for cases in which there is retaliation violence by sufferers of intimate partner violence, and even the homicide of the perpetrators can be classified as a means of self-defense. And here are some more current trends regarding intimate partner violence. Women in their 20s and 30s are more likely to experience intimate partner violence. And there are certain other populations which have been at significantly higher risk for intimate partner violence, especially, and these include pregnant women, individuals who are HIV positive, and sex workers. Whereas I found this also interesting. It said that single, separated, and divorced women are actually at higher risk for intimate partner violence than married women. Here are some reporting statistics. Um, Whereas in 1998, 1 in 3 murders were related to intimate partner violence, and approximately 25 to 30% of female patients in the emergency room sought treatment for domestic violence. Um, Also, during the 1990s, researchers found that the single most common cause of female injury brought to medical attention was related to abuse after they used a trauma screen to identify how the injury was caused. Um, Additionally, in regard to ER statistics, even though 25 to 30% of female patients usually seek treatment for domestic violence, only 2 to 10% are identified by physicians as being abused, which indicates that especially health professionals drastically underreport the incidence of intimate partner violence. Over the last 30 years, there has been a shift in the United States' approach to domestic violence. Whereas police procedures have become more stringent, including tougher protective orders, higher rates of perpetrator arrests without warrants, and higher rates of prosecution. Also, the media attention has been increased to the public regarding domestic violence. And there's a movie from the 1990s that I really liked. It's called Sleeping with the Enemy, and it has Julia Roberts. I put a link to the YouTube video that has the trailer, so you should definitely check it out to kind of get an idea of what it must be like for so many women out there. Also, approaches to domestic violence with intervention has evolved within the legal system. They're including a more systematic and cohesive approach through things like the Duluth Project in Minnesota, whereas the Duluth Project has become a model for legal domestic violence intervention. Many of the police officers and the dispatch, judges, probation officers, and therapists all have to coordinate together to effectively address the perpetrators of domestic violence. And that way, they don't have any perpetrators fall through the cracks. Therefore, they're monitored basically from the second they get a phone call through the dispatch from 911 until they complete intervention processes at the very end of the period of probation and everything, or parole. Also, the services for the perpetrators of domestic violence have been acknowledged through educational as well as therapeutic intervention, which should significantly affect further domestic violence. Although traditional gender roles do play a part in many domestic violence cases, there are also more complex dynamics which influence the occurrence of domestic violence. And these include societal, cultural, psychological, and social factors. However, there are lots of theories which have attempted to explain the causes of intimate partner violence. And I'm going to go ahead and touch on a few of these theories of intimate partner violence before handing over the presentation to Brittany. All right, so the first theory that the text mentions is about attachment and traumatic bonding. So, researchers theorize that perpetrators of intimate partner violence may have suffered abusive or neglectful relationships during childhood. Therefore, they suffer from abandonment and trust issues. And they believe that the lack of early healthy attachment could potentially influence the perpetrator to use violence as a form of control and to avoid their perception of abandonment, potentially. Now, many of the researchers believe that the partners receiving the abuse may also have abandonment issues, which could lead to traumatic bonding within the abusive relationship. And this kind of explains why so many women kind of go back to the perpetrator of domestic violence through the traumatic bonding relationship. Now, the next theory has to do with coercive control. Um, Morgan in 1982 described this theory as a type of psychological terroristic like attack on a victim, causing the individual to depend on the perpetrator um, through the use of brainwashing and terrorist like techniques. These techniques included isolating the victim physically and socially, sleep deprivation, torture, and different types of psychological abuse. Um, However, the victims and perpetrators of these cases are usually more rare, um, and the victims are actually more likely to seek help from shelters in these cases. Whereas the victims are also more likely to have more PTSD symptoms, to have more injuries and attacks, and they're also less likely to have the violence stop after leaving the relationship, as the perpetrator has been characterized as more dangerous than a lot of typical offenders. The next theory is cultural reinforcement. This theory basically bases domestic abuse in these cases as a means of keeping social order in certain cultures, whereas these cultures use force to maintain social structure to protect their national presence. This social structure is sort of like a hierarchy of abusive control, going from the state to the family to the individual, and the male to the female, and then the adult to the child. The next theory is exchange theory. This theory holds that there are subcultures of violence and aggression that may be learned as part of being a man. It's a variation of social learning theory, but it holds that with this type of social learning, that if the costs don't outweigh the rewards, then the abuse will continue into the future. Therefore, if they don't get caught or if they don't get reported to the police and have to face charges and go through kind of treatment and stuff like that, then they're going to continue the abuse. And also, the abuse is sort of primarily about power, physical size, and status. That way, they don't have to fear about any type of retaliation of the individual. Feminist theory is in regard to seeing society as a patriarchal and sexist society. Feminist theory believes that women are kept in lesser societal positions, which causes these women to feel like they're not empowered and to stay in potentially abusive situations for longer periods of time. The feminist theory believes that the problem has to do with society romanticizing male dominance and violence, as well as female submissiveness. And they also believe that other forms of family violence are byproducts of intimate partner violence. So, intra-individual theory asserts that aggression and rage reactions may be the result of neurophysiological disorders, internal head trauma, and substance abuse, um, which a lot of these symptoms of rage and aggression are included in many of these disorders and pathological symptoms. Whereas also research indicates that individuals who are diagnosed with psychiatric disorders are at a greater risk for being involved in intimate partner violence. Now, the last theory I'm going to cover before handing this off to Brittany is learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is part of the social learning theory dynamic. The research shows that factors in childhood, such as witnessing domestic violence between parents and experiencing abuse as a child, is very strongly correlated with perpetrating or experiencing intimate partner violence as an adult. Learned helplessness theory suggests that classical conditioning plays a major part in intimate partner violence. Whereas victims become conditioned to believe that they can't predict what's going to happen and that nothing they do or anyone else can do is going to help them out of their situations. Learned helplessness is also defined as victims behaving in a way that has the highest predictability of experiencing the least amount of harm. So this has a lot to do with avoiding harm. And then it was further suggested that there's a survivor hypothesis where victims of intimate partner violence focus on actively and resourcefully protecting themselves and their children from harm inside their current situation. And this can also be due to fearing what's going to happen later if the perpetrator of domestic violence potentially fights for custody and gains custody of the children, or if there could be further retaliation of the perpetrator of domestic violence, then this theory is particularly relevant for that kind of thinking. And the quote that they use in the book to kind of illustrate this is, "Better the devil I know than the devil I don't." Also, before I go, this is the power and control wheel. This especially shows how different types of control can be used, which connotates abuse. And so there's many things on here, such as like economic abuse. Whenever you keep the partner from money, maybe having like a separate bank account and only giving the partner very little so that they can't actually leave. Using coercion and threats. Sometimes children are especially used to threaten significant others. And that goes along with intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, minimizing, denying, blaming. And then this was part of the dynamic that I mentioned earlier with the using the children. All right. And now here Brittany's going to talk about some of the rest of the theories from the text.
Hi, this is Brittany Campos. I'm going to pick up where Victoria left off. And on here with the theories, we have masochism, which is basically a form of a psychoanalytic theory. And it has that the primary motivating factor in the relationship is the fact that it is an abusive relationship. There's not a lot of research that's been covered over this theory. And basically, it wasn't until the 1970s that research began to really even emerge. And that was just because of the feminist movement really had some piqued interest to try and look at alternative theories. The next slide is about the nested ecological theory. And basically, within this theory, you have multiple layers. And within the layers, the person is experiencing just different things to try and best understand the complexities of the battering. You have the first layer being the core of the experience. This is your shame, your denial. The next one goes into the structure of the family systems, whether there was abandonment, any neglect, or abuse. The third layer goes into community and peer groups. This could be within like religious groups, alcohol and drug use, any gender role socialization. And the last one seems to be a little bit more broad, which is where it goes within the media and looking at how the media portrays violence against women and just gender inequities or any ethnic prejudices. Psychological entrapment is basically that the woman doesn't leave the relationship because she feels like she's already invested too much time and energy and just emotion in it. So there's a lot of this wishful thinking that the abuser is just going to like magically wake up one day and no longer be abusive, or that he's going to turn into this really loving, great husband or partner or spouse, and it just never happens. There's also a lot of shame attached to this theory with the fact that the person's just really trying to hide the fact that they're being abused and they don't want the public to know, and seem like almost a sense of guilt that if it got out, what would it look like to the public world. So lots of hiding of what's going on. Sociobiology is the next theory, and it is more of an evolutionary adaptation. It's basically a form of aggression. It states how we're basically born with natural aggression, and if someone comes in and tries to threaten that chance of survival, or even as a way to protect the species, aggression is going to naturally come out. There's a lot of questions on this theory, and just not a lot of answers to those questions. Stockholm Syndrome is discussed further in chapter 15, but they do touch on it briefly. And basically, the person has been completely isolated by the abuser. The survival is just completely dependent on them, whether or not they're going to survive or not. And because of this extremity of requiring the abuser to hold so much control in the situation, and they're the only one that is seeing him, there's a emotional bond that creates with the abuser. Systems theory is a theory that really has kind of multiple steps. They start off by talking about that within this theory, they call it more of a battering relationship, and that overall the system is just going to be a more violence prone system, like that the abuse is going to happen. And because of the fact that you have this, it almost creates a balance in the system, this homeostasis it was stated as. And the reason for all of this goes into more that the abuser just basically believes they can escape any consequences. That because it's happening in their home, it's behind closed doors, that no one is necessarily aware of what's going on, that they have the right to do all of that, and that it was okay. So there's no consequences for them. The next area covers the shelters, and it starts off comparing basically what the difference is between a center and a shelter. A center is something that is going to be much more short term. It offers more of a on-site crisis intervention. It has maybe online or telephone calls to the center. It's going to be something much more long term. It has a live-in facility for the women and their families. It offers counseling services. It offers follow-up services to the women. With women at shelters, they basically fit into two different categories. You have the ones who are not quite sure yet if they really want to leave the battering relationship. And then you also have the other end where they are 100% sure that they're done. And so they offer, within these dynamics, just basically different things to cover with these women. It starts off with grief. And grief is something that the women that are coming in are experiencing because a lot of times they could be dependent on their abuser, and this form of guilt and blame kind of comes over, and it states that basically all of these are part of the grieving process and just kind of working through how for so long that this grief has been a part of their lives. The next area is with depression, and they said that it was very common that when the women come into the shelters, they come in and they just sleep. And it can come off almost as them being lazy and just not wanting to do anything. But really, they looked further and saw that it's kind of a form of depression, that they're coming in and they're sleeping, but they're going through this stage of trying to just regroup energy that they just didn't have anymore. And then the last area is terror. And a lot of women who come into the shelters have a sense of terror because even though they've escaped this relationship, there's still the fear that, maybe they haven't escaped it, or all of these questions that pop up, and the terror that follows with that. The last area is with follow-up, and the shelters will give the women an opportunity to pursue counseling further outside the shelter, or different services that they may need that's related to them. And so as a follow, the next area is just a discussion question, and it states, when working with clients who have left a shelter, what are some support services or sources that you think could be offered? The next is a resource, and this is a link that provides a lot of different emergency shelters that are offered all within the area. They have it divided up by county, and I found that this could be a great resource when working with clients. A lot of times people come in from all different areas, and having the opportunity to kind of refer them to something that is maybe in where they close to where they live versus where the clinic or practice or wherever it is that you're working is, it can just be a great resource. The last slide that I'm covering is over gay and lesbian violence. And in gay and lesbian violence, the statistics go on saying that there's about 10% of the whole population that's in a same-sex relationship. And within this population, there's very little violence that's actually reported. The book discusses that because of the negative view kind of attached to a same-gender relationship, that the violence, the calls or the effort made to report it is just not happening because there's almost a fear attached to what if I get more criticism, or what if I get more judgment bestowed upon me, and so they just don't do it. And some of the ones that are reported is just 10 to 20% of males in gay relationships are assaulted each year. And so with taking into consideration how much is not reported, it just would be alarming maybe how much the statistics would actually be. The next area is with crisis intervention, and with crisis intervention, it states that basically this, for a gay and lesbian couple, there's no difference for the intervention to them that it would be for a heterosexual couple. You still have power and control as these key motivating factors in the relationship, and you just have more of an area of sensitivity because the people in the crisis intervention center have to have this sort of sensitivity when working with these clients because they've come in and they're seeking help, and it's not something that happens very often. There's a lot of reluctance to come in and talk about this. There's trust issues, and so just making sure that you're offering, or the person working is offering the best care that they can to not harm them is key. The next area is with safety and support, and a lot of concern with the area is that there's not a lot of resources available just for gay and lesbians to come in and seek a safe place that's offered just to them. So a lot of reports go on to say that they don't do it because there's not specific support groups for them. And so having the opportunity to maybe see, what the future brings, and the more opportunities that these safety places are given, how many more maybe would start coming and feeling like a safe place to come to.
Okay, so the book talks about some psychological factors that are specific to partner violence and partner violence only. and how both parties who are involved in a battering situation may have certain identifiable characteristics. Um, and those characteristics, it's important to understand that they're not like individual ingredients for both parties, but they kind of are like complex forces that work together. They kind of coexist with each other. And the book does a great job of outlining what those factors are or what those factors may be. And they're different in men than they are in women. Some examples, excuse me, are men in battering relationships may demonstrate excessive dependency and possessiveness towards their women, although they deny it. And maybe you see this from a day-to-day basis. Maybe you have some friends that you observe, and you see that in their relationship, the man is really dependent on the woman and really possessive toward her. But if you approach that man about it, they become, very kind of angry or they deny it. Now, once again, kind of backtracking, that may happen in a lot of relationships. That doesn't mean that they're in a battering relationship. These are just some characteristics that have taken place. Men also may be unable to express any emotion except anger, and generally have poor communication skills where emotional issues are concerned. They may also have unrealistic expectations of their spouses and idealize marriage or the relationship far beyond what realistically may be expected. Once again, I've seen this plenty of times, but that person wasn't in a battering relationship. However, this does show up in some of the characteristics of men who are in battering relationships. As women in battering relationships may have a lack of self-esteem as a result of being told over and over that they are stupid, incompetent, and otherwise inadequate. They may also experience a lack of control and little confidence in their ability to take any meaningful steps to improve their marriage. And, excuse me, I'm sorry. They may also be so ashamed that they hide their physical and emotional wounds and become socially and emotionally isolated. So those are just some examples of the characteristics that go along with the psychological factors. So some stressors, partner violence, which you can imagine there's a lot of stressors within a partner violence relationship. But I think the four most kind of important that stood out to us within the book were the economic stress, and that's kind of like when a woman is unemployed or underemployed, she has inadequate housing, she's pressured by creditors and can't feed or clothe her children by herself. She basically is just at the whim of her abusive partner. And this is where a lot of times people are saying, hey, you can get out of this relationship, and people are like, it's easier said than done. Well, nothing can be more true when you look at the situation. Well, what can she do if she's underemployed or unemployed? What can she do if the person she's with is providing that house or providing that money, is helping feed their children? That's a really big stressor. And some people don't think so, but it really is. Also, alcohol and drug abuse. So chemical dependency is serious enough to cause economic chaos. And severe emotional disturbance characterizes addictive families and has spin-offs that commonly include spouse abuse. They're often, like, alcohol and drug abuse is often used as an excuse for the actual behavior, like the actual battering. But that's normally prohibited by societal norms and standards. So most people are like, maybe the man or something was like, hey, I was drunk, I was using some drugs, and I hit this woman or whatever. From a society standpoint, we don't take that as an excuse. But that's a stressor in itself, because there's a lot of other different issues. Other than a relationship, if you're abusing alcohol and drugs. So another big one for me that stood out to me is educational and vocational disparity. And what that pretty much means is if a female in a relationship has a higher education attainment or a higher vocational status than the male, it may kind of raise questions of adequacy and responsibility for both parties, more or less for the male as well. It's now, I wouldn't say obvious to see, but most people would agree that males kind of like being the alpha male, and it's kind of frowned upon to let in the relationship the woman be the smarter one, so they take that as a stressor and even try to use that as an excuse. But another stressor for a woman because she may be highly skilled and highly educated, and that be a reason or a trigger for the male to do things that he shouldn't be doing, which kind of rolls right into the threat to masculinity. So some men who perceive themselves as less masculine see their use of battering as affirming their masculinity. Okay, I can't put that in more plain words other than I'm a man and you're taking that away from me, so I'm going to abuse you so you know that I am a man, but a little bit more into their terms. One of the greatest things I like about this book is it talks about some myths of battering, right? There's a ton of them. I think the book lists only 15, but we discussed in our group that there was maybe even possible more. We were just going, and we actually made one of the discussion questions about myths. I think it's very, very eye-opening. But some of the ones that stood out to us was, one, battered women provoke the beating. I've heard this from time to time from cases like Ray Rice in the NFL, or I can even stay in the NFL with a lot of other players, Greg Hardy and stuff like that. But some people actually defend them and say, hey, this woman provoked the beating, right? I don't think anybody should be beat. I'm not a physical person, but I definitely don't think that a woman should be beat. So although some women may be classified as a stereotypical like nag, they're certainly not, or there can certainly be many significant others in a man's life who fit into the nag category who are not beating. So what that statement kind of says is like, okay, there's a lot of people who nag. Not everybody who nags get beat up. So that kind of excuse goes out of the window. Little myth there. Another myth that kind of stood out to us is battering is a private family matter. And especially if you want to go into cultural things, I know kind of what happens in the family stays in the family. I know at least in my culture and some other people that I talk to, that's a very real thing. So when beaten, women are disenfranchised, and from their homes and their children's and battering relationships, they learn the pathological roles of battering father models. You know, battering kind of transcends the home and becomes the society's problem. But all 50 states now have warrantless arrest policies for battering, and that means that battering is anything but private. So it's almost everybody's issue, because it's not right to do. So if you know somebody, I would advise you not to keep it into the family, but speak up about it. Also, that alcohol abuse is a prime reason of wife abuse. And we kind of talked about this on the last slide, that alcohol is no excuse. And it's kind of like even with consent, if you want to go down a sexual route, if a woman or anybody is drinking alcohol, they can no longer consent. Because you may or may not have lost inhibitions, but your mind is altered, so you're not necessarily making a decision on a clear mind. So, not an excuse, very much a myth, and that violence and love cannot coexist. One that I really spoke to me, because I speak on things about this all the time, and as strange as it may seem, members of violent families may still love one another. So this paradoxical aspect is most problematic because children and the families kind of grow up believing you hit the people that you love. So if a child is in the house with parents who are in a battering relationship and some partner violence is going on, their version of love that they see growing up is, hey, if I love this person, I will hit that person. So the cycle kind of continues as we talked about earlier. So the book also talks about profiling the batterer, and this is kind of specifically to try to figure out who the batterer is, what the batterer kind of looks like, not on a physical scale, but on some other scales. And the researchers have kind of examined multiple personalities and behavior typologies, and they've came up with three major groups of batterers. So the three major groups are, as seen on the slide: family only, dysphoric or anxious or borderline, and generally violent / antisocial. And I'll kind of break down those three major groupings really quickly. So the family only batterer they're really highly dependent on somebody. They're really impulsive and they have very poor communication skills. And they have a family origin of violence. So, retracting back into the last slide, the child that grew up in a house where their parents got beat or beat each other, and they kind of repeat that cycle. A perfect example of that, and this is no way to segue or make an excuse for it, but a perfect example of that is if anybody knows about Chris Brown and Rihanna. Chris Brown would fit into the family-only batterer, given that he kind of fits the criteria. And his parents, he's openly talked about him growing up in a house where that was acceptable. His dad beating on his mother, and he didn't necessarily, while he knew it was the wrong thing, he kind of explained that like that's what we did, so that's why I did it. But there we go, a family-only batterer. The second one, the dysphoric / borderline, they have a history of parental rejection and also child abuse, delinquent acts, and poor communication and social skills. As the main kind of theme that you see with a lot of these is that they have poor communication skills. But that's just a little plug to get in there. Remember that partner violence, most of them have really poor communication skills. And third, generally violent and antisocial is exactly what you would think it is. These people are extremely aggressive and impulsive. They view violence as an appropriate way to kind of provide anything, inside or outside of the home. Violence is the answer for them. So those are the three main major groups of batterers based on the book. So one of my favorite slides, the cycle of violence, kind of looks like this. Not exactly like this, but kind of does. The book talks about what the cycle is based on Walker's kind of cycle theory of violence, and there's a couple of stages or phases. Phase one being that tranquility kind of prevails. So that would kind of be the calm at the blue piece at the bottom that says calm. And this is that the relationship has been characterized as calm at this point. There's no previous violent incidents or a period of calm may follow an earlier violent episode. So everything's good right now. Everything's good in the hood. We're calm. We're back on good notes. We're kind of singing to each other. Maybe we're even going back out on dates, and everything's fine, right? Phase two in the cycle of violence is that the tension is starting to build up again, and that's that orange sticky note that says tension is building. This could be caused by a variety of stressors. They can be like in a combination, or they can singly come from one thing. But it's important to know that at this stage, there's no reducing. Like, there's no calm, we're going to tension building, and then we're going back to calm. Like, it's tension building, and then we're moving on to the next step, which is a violent episode occurs. So, the incident, sticky note on the chalkboard. Excuse me. Then an episode of rage from harsh words or to a severe beating may happen. So, communication is broken down. Once again, poor communication, and the situation is at this time out of control, right? And it goes from there into like crisis proportions. So not really a sticky note on this slide for it, but at this point, it's a couple things that become options when it's a crisis. But it's kind of coming back down. So there's an incident, and then the making up part, which is, so forgive me, there is a sticky note for this. The making up part for this section is kind of the crisis portion. And there's a couple things that can happen. So the abuser can become remorseful and ask for forgiveness. And then sooner or later, the victim kind of forgives the abuser and calm is restored. So we're back to calm again. Or the abuser is not remorseful and feels control over the situation has been established, and the victim gives in and relinquishes control and calm is restored, right? Or the victim takes new action. And with this, there's two possibilities. The abuser negotiates the situation and is given or is in agreement with the victim, and calm is restored, or the abuser rejects the new action and the crisis state continues. But the basic thing is exactly what the blackboard shows you right now. So it starts out being calm, there's tension building, the incident happens, We kind of go into the crisis and the making up period, right? And then we're back at calm. And then we're back at tension. And we're back at incident. And then we're at makeup. And then we're back at calm. It's literally just a continual cycle of violence. So this slide kind of talks about, and what the book talks about, is the realities of partner violence. And one of the biggest questions with why women stay, why men stay, is those little cute faces on the right. Um, some of these relationships are, I can maybe even say most of these relationships are predicated around children. And so the book says a quote that's kind of very profound for me. It says, and I quote, "In actuality, most women who are in bad relationships do leave. And this in itself is a courageous act because it is one of the most dangerous things that a woman can do." Why do you say that? Well, the book goes on to talk about a lot of things, about how women leave a relationship on average to 3 to 6 times, but do so with varying degrees of permanency. So they try to get out. They really try to get out. But there's a couple of things that pull them back. And most of those things are children, right? So the situation may be like very intolerable for the woman, but her children have to have food, and they have to have clothing, and they have to have shelter. So if that man provides that, the woman is a little bit more inclined to stay with that man. Like I said earlier, retracting to some earlier slides, it's easier said than done. So, also, this is the interesting thing that the book talks about. The book talks about how, in the nature of abuse, her spouse or her mate may not be terrible 24 hours in a day, 7 days a week. And this is back to the cycle, right? There's periods of calm. And so a lot of times people will hang on to that, right? They will say, "I remember the calm times, and this is wonderful whenever you're calm. Whenever we're not having an incident, whenever there's not tension building up, you are perfect. We are perfect. This family is perfect." And there goes that idealizing kind of marriage, idealizing the relationship that is kind of unrealistic. But it's hard to let go of those things when you've already seen it, especially when you have children or other things. And also, if we can bring religion in as a role too, or a factor that plays a role, that the woman may hold religious values that strongly, like that are really against separation, divorce, or anything else, right? So they might be really religious to the fact where I'm going to stay here because in my religion, this is what I'm supposed to be to you, right? Could also go with the woman being undereducated. So she has no job skills maybe, and this man is providing for her and her children. Once again, those children, those pretty little faces to the right, what can I do? I can't do anything. I must stay for them. So those are some of the realities. This next slide talks into some intervention strategies, and there were a bunch in the book, but basically what they're talking about is being able to kind of intervene into a battering relationship or into partner violence when you have the chance to do so, because you're really walking on eggshells when it comes to this. So, excuse me, I cannot. Okay, so you're really walking on eggshells when you're talking about a battering relationship, especially to women or people who feel like they're trapped and they can't get out, right? But there are a couple things that you can do. One of the biggest being assessment. So one of those things, and assessment is kind of broken down, into a lot of different things. One of them is personality measures. And as weird as this sounds, there was a couple assessments that they're talking about in the book that they were trying to say, hey, if you take this personality assessment, maybe there's some personality things about you as to why you are getting battered. And from one of the studies that I think it was Hodling and Sugarman did, they only found one characteristic in common, and that was having witnessed or been a victim of personal violence as a child. Everything else didn't match, so that was kind of, and I don't know why somebody would even come up with that theory, but I guess it's a theory. However, the better assessment is to kind of find out or measure traits that arise as a result of experiencing a battered relationship. So a woman may present with something, and it's really finding out if that woman has post-traumatic stress disorders and stuff like that, and where did it start, and finding out things and behaviors that started after the battering started. So that's what we meant by personality measures and stuff like that. Where did her personality shift based on this? Another one thing is clinical interviews, and this is important to ask, and this is really about figuring out family history of hitting and threats and controlling and destruction of property, and things like that. Forced sex, alcohol and drug abuse, just a couple things off the top of the head. And clinical interviews are pretty good for that. In a medical setting, this one's kind of really cool for me because I feel like it's really sneaky. But the book was talking about how a lot of times women won't cooperate with nurses. Doesn't matter how empathetic you are, or with somebody in a medical setting, won't cooperate because they don't feel like they're being abused. So it's important for a surgeon, it's important for a nurse, it's important for us as counselors to be able to, if we're in, or a psychologist or whatever in a medical setting, to be able to look at these symptoms, look at these signs, and say, hey, this may be abuse, but then tell them, like, hey, we're going to do this check so we can keep kind of like a history. This is just a routine checkup. Like, we do this is routine, boom. That way you can still have the information. A little sneaky, but at least you have the information. So, and the last thing is crisis line, which is, I learned more and more about this stuff since being in this class, about hotlines for crisis. So y'all know all about that, calling the hotline when a crisis is up, but it's really beneficial to intervene in a battering relationship and partner violence because you have the ability to get help there if help is needed, when help is needed. Almost continuing with the crisis is the components of that actual intervention or crisis line or stuff like that. So the 3 or 4 major components of intervention is listening, supporting, facilitating, and ensuring safety. And all of these kind of work beautifully together if they're done correctly. So listening, not in the fact that just like, oh, you're hearing something, but active listening and responding, they're really crucial. So the victim must know that the crisis worker understands and accepts their present situation, and that the counselor or whoever it is non-judgmental and not in a non-value laden way. That's what the book says. It's really important that we do that as counselors, or the person does that, because we want that person to open up. If we can't get that person to open up, we're not going to be able to support them. We're not going to be able to facilitate moving them or whatever, and we're not going to be able to ensure their safety if we can't get them to open up about what's going on. So listening and responding may be the most important step. That's why it's the first one. But it goes right into supporting, and supporting is not necessarily being sympathetic or empathetic, but actually understanding, hey, or empathizing with the client or the person, but also trying to meet them where they're at or supporting them in their situation. So language would be very, in this entire situation, but especially in supporting, language is very crucial in figuring out the words you're going to say, because one word might sway one way, another word might go the other way and send you down the wrong road. Facilitating, that is kind of facilitating the movement of the victim, and that takes a great deal of patience and tenacity, but it's important that that happens. And I don't think you get to facilitating if you don't support and listen. You're not going to be able to move that person to a safe place, and that's what we're going to roll into, is ensuring safety. And I think that's what we all care about the most, especially in crisis situation, is ensuring that the client, assuring that the person who is calling or presenting with this issue, with this crisis, with this battering or partner violence, assuring that they're safe, because if they're safe, they will listen to you, they will understand it or feel supported, and maybe they're willing to move and do the things that you are recommending to them. So it's important that that happens. At times, the child might be with the woman who comes in, or with the parent that comes in who presents with this battering problem. And it's important that you have to intervene or have intervention with the children as well as the parents. Very important. And some of those techniques is a little funny picture on the right is actually a really cool technique that I think is really awesome, and it will help bring together the children, or make the child a little bit more knowledgeable in a way that the child is not traumatized. But some of the things or techniques that you should do, or whatever, or goals that should come out. I can't speak. I'm sorry. Outcomes that should be for the child is creating an alliance with the parent to help the child heal, and also to provide psychoeducation to both the parent and the child about trauma in education. That little hand exercise right there, I'll dive into it a little bit more when we get to the actual handout. Okay, so some exercises, and we picked 2 exercises that can be done with people who are, if you're dealing with a client that's dealing with partner violence and you're trying to get them back to kind of zero, and this is after you've gotten a little bit of history of them. One of my favorite exercises that we researched is called the $1 Million Giveaway. So the prompt is, you give this to the client, and or you can read it out, and you say, hey, if I was given $1 million today, but I have to spend it immediately, I would buy the following 10 things. So you have the client take out a piece of paper and list them. But remember, you must spend it and buy stuff with it. You cannot invest it in stocks or put it into the bank. So list 10 things that you truly want. And what that's going to do for that client is, or even for you, it's going to give you an idea of where that client's mind is. It's going to let you know what's their main focus. Are they putting down material things like, oh, I want this new Versace bag or whatever? And I'm not really hip on purses and stuff like that, but is it material things, or is it like, I'm gonna buy a plane ticket to San Francisco and never come back? I'm gonna buy a nice house, and I'm gonna buy some sort of fund for my children to go to college, and I want to pay for a good lawyer, divorce lawyer, or what are those things? It kind of lets you gauge where the client's mind is given their responses. So I really like that exercise. It's something they can do. It's really tangible, something that they can take with them, something that you can keep and you can review. Really like that idea. And the last exercise that I had is, it's called The Last Time I Felt Was. And then I should go back and say, not that I had, but that we had. And this is an exercise that you give to them, and they fill it out. Once again, something that's tangible that they can keep, something that you can keep, and it also lets you know where their mindset is. So they have to answer questions like, the last time I felt success was blank. The last time I did something that I really, really didn't want to do, but did it anyway, was blank. The last time I felt truly happy was blank. So you get the gist of that. But what it allows you to do, once again, is to see where their mind's at. I would encourage them, hey, be truthful. This is a safe space. Remember, this is confidential. So if you put anything on there that's a little alarming or whatever, nobody else is going to see this but me. Well, to a certain extent. But that's what it allows for you to do. And I really, 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 really like that. It's a good thing. A file that will be uploaded is the hand exercise that is supposed to be for children. Sasha actually did the drawing and worked on it, so I think it's very beautiful. I would encourage you to take a look at that, and also any other videos that we post with our videos, and any other materials that we post with our materials. Feel free to look at that. So this would be the concluding end of our presentation. So I would like to thank you for sitting through this entire 48 minutes, listening to us ramble and speak on partner violence. I would also like to thank our teacher for giving us such a wonderful topic. It's such a great class. But thank you. Goodbye.